Okay, this is looking like we've got a pretty stable attendance here. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Julia Fulgham. I'm the Director of Advance at UNM, and thank you for making the time to join us today. What we're going to do is reverse engineer developing a promotion and tenure dossier. And well, our milestone evaluation dossier. So we're gonna, what we're gonna say is going to be relevant to whether we're gonna consider aspects of developing the mid-probationary review, promotion and tenure, promotion to professor. There's a lot of similarities, and at any time, you know, if you have questions, please put them in the chat, and we'll also save lots of time at the end for questions. I'm going to give you a brief introduction to the process. Then Susan Halter is going to talk about the Provost Promotion and Tenure Committee. Jane Ellen Smith is going to talk about how to think about it from the department point of view. And then I'm going to talk about how you write the narrative, and Jess Fiesel will talk about how she developed her dossier. So by the end of this, you should have some good strategies and sort of tips for how to start thinking about the dossier and know what questions to be asking. There's a lot of information in this PowerPoint, and we will send it out to you after this presentation, and the links all work, so don't worry about copying them. They'll be in this, and we'll send this out to you later today. I also want to say on the Advance website, last summer, I made short, they're under 20 minutes, narrated PowerPoints that hit the high points of what we're going to talk about today, but that are specific to whether you're applying for mid-pro, promotion and tenure, promotion to professor. So you also might want to use those as a review. So a key thing is that writing your and developing your dossier is telling your story. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by the fact that you've got expectations from your colleagues and your department and your college or school and the university. But the best way to persuade people you have fulfilled those expectations is to tell your story about how you have developed your career. And it can make it a little less fraught or stressful. It is a stressful process, but it can make it a little less stressful if you think about, what do you want the narrative to be? You're going to need research, teaching, and service statements, but you want to think about what's your story, what's your narrative, not what's the story of the person who was up for tenure last year, or, you know, up for promotion to professor or whatever. What's your story? We very much do consider individual accomplishments. You are not going to be, you know, directly side by side compared to other people in your department. It's what have you done? So you want to figure out what your story is, because that's going to impact how people view it. And you've got a lot of control over this, particularly if you seize control from the beginning before you start writing. In general, people want to say yes. You know, they want to approve your mid-probationary review. They want to help you. They want to say yes to tenure. They want to say yes to promotion. And so what this workshop is going to do is help you figure out how to get them to yes. And up front, you're supposed to provide concise narratives. And it takes longer to write something that is coherent, compelling, and concise than to write a long document. So give yourself time to do that, because it is a process of going through multiple drafts to be able to really come up with the concise document that hits the points you want people to come away from going through your dossier with. And also know up front, start practicing being patient. This is not a short process. So we're talking to you right now about dossier prep that you'll need to be working on this summer. Some of you will do it this summer. Some of you will extend it into the fall. As well you should. Most of the mid-probationary reviews are towards the end of the fall semester, and you're going to want to have current information. But anything you can do to get most of the statements written this summer, you'll really appreciate, because it is hard to carve out that time to write concisely. The department votes and chair's evaluation are due to the college or school leadership sometime between late fall and early spring. This varies depending on the size of the college and school, earlier in arts and sciences than in some of the smaller schools. The dean's recommendation, which is based on the college and school level promotion and tenure committee, and the dean's evaluation goes to the provost office in the middle of next spring semester. The provost committee meets, and then the senior vice provost takes the committee recommendations and makes recommendations to the provost, and the provost decisions have to be in your hands by June 30th. So you're going to put an enormous effort in front end and then spend a lot of time going, okay, I want to know now. And you're not going to know now, but you are going to know at each step how it's going. But be prepared to be a little patient. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Susan Halter, who's a professor in civil and construction and environmental engineering and has been on the provost committee for a couple of years now. And I will stop sharing my screen so you can see her.
Great. Thanks, Julia. I have just a few comments I'll make, and then I just want everyone to know that I'll be around for the whole meeting. So if there's question time period at the end, I'm happy to answer questions. But where the provost committee falls into this is in that schedule that Julia just showed, is the spring time frame, and basically April. April is when the provost office convenes the provost level committee. And so April, we have been meeting this whole month to discuss dossiers that were submitted last year. And this committee is made up of faculty, basically full professors from all across campus and all across main campus. There are other committees for branch campuses and for health sciences, but we, the committee I've been serving on, serves all the main campus colleges and departments. And we have representation from all across the campus. And so what we do is we are reviewing the entire package. So by the time we get it at the provost committee, it includes everything you submitted, you know, typically in the fall semester. It includes any external letters for those tenure and promotion packages. Any external letters are included. And it includes departmental recommendations and votes. It includes college level recommendations and votes. And then our job at the provost level is to take a look at this, your package as a whole, and really take a look at it in view of the fact that we are a university with many different departments and many different colleges, and many of you doing such wonderful things in so many different areas. And so we take this look at these packages, and as Julia had mentioned, we really are very aware and very positive, I think, in the wonderful things that the faculty at UNM are doing. And we really appreciate seeing packages that really do highlight your unique contributions. And we don't necessarily want or you know, aren't looking for every package, every dossier to look the same. We really are looking for the unique aspects, and we evaluate each dossier individually. There's no comparison, there's no ranking, this is better than the other. Everything is viewed independently based on the university's requirements in terms of, you know, excellence in teaching, research, or service. So the university and each school and department have sort of their guidelines, right? And the general expectation is that you will be viewed as excellent in either teaching or research, and then at least effective in the other areas. And so we take a look at these packages and view them from a whole university wide level. And so definitely conciseness is important. Length does not get extra points. But really we really enjoy looking at the unique aspects that come out of all the different departments. So with that, I think I'll just stop there, Julia. And like I said, I'm happy to answer questions later on as you continue on and provide more information.
Thank you, Susan. We're going to go now to Jane Ellen Smith. Jane has been department chair in psychology for probably longer. She isn't chair now, she's recovering, for probably longer than she wants to admit, but she's seen a lot of mid-pro and promotion and tenure and promotion files, and is going to talk a little about what do you want to think about to help your local colleagues say yes. And Jane has another meeting at 12:30, which is why we're reverse engineering, but has also written out some notes she's going to send to me, and then we will send out with the PowerPoint. And so if you have questions for her while she's talking, go ahead and stick them in the chat.
Hey, thanks, Julia. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I'm just impressed with how you guys are getting started on this process early. That's wonderful, because you'll have plenty of time to work on all the things Julia is going to tell you definitely need to be working on. I thought I'd just mostly talk to you today about some of the things that have come to me over my 12 years as chair, mostly in terms of feedback I get from faculty members, because the chair's letter is largely driven by the people who review you within your department. So, faculty, tenured faculty would, or whoever is at your level or higher, would get to vote on you, of course. And depending on the department, a presentation is made on your behalf, and then people discuss it, and then there's voting afterwards. So what comes to the chair are the evaluations or letters of all the people who are voting on you. And in the course of looking over these over the years, you can see some of the things people have had trouble with when they're trying to review your dossiers. So I thought I'd just mention a few things there. I guess the first thing, though, before we get to the dossiers is, make sure you meet ahead of time with whoever's presenting your case to the department. And, in some departments you have mentors assigned to you. I know in psychology we have both a research and a teaching mentor, and they're supposed to be meeting with the person throughout, but make sure you meet with this person prior to the time they're going to be presenting your case to the faculty, because that's the person who can help you sort through maybe some questions that come up that people will have as they look at your dossier, and they'll have answers to it. So I just put a couple that tend to come up. So for example, if something happened one semester, like maybe this semester when you had to go to Zoom for the first time and your teaching ratings dropped, or maybe for some reason there was another unusual class. So let's say you have a class or two where your ratings are significantly lower than the others. People will probably notice that, but as long as you either explained it yourself in your dossier, or I think it's best to talk to someone who's going to be presenting your case, because that clears it up right away. You don't keep people wondering about it then. I think it's always best to be proactive. If you see a shortcoming, don't assume people are going to not notice it. They do notice these things. So you want to make sure that just talk it over with the person who's presenting your case. Another thing that has come up is, like, sometimes people will submit grant proposals at the time they're coming up for promotion, and it's not clear if they don't get that grant funded, how they're going to continue to carry on their work. And so you just need to have a conversation or put it in the dossier about maybe your other line of work that you're going to be doing, or how you're going to be able to do this work without that grant funding. So that would be another thing. And then another thing that comes up often is if you're collaborating with, let's say, a senior investigator from another university, make sure that your contribution to those manuscripts or whatever it is that you're collaborating on, make sure it's clear what your role is, because people can be suspicious. Well, what role did this person play? Was it a minor role or was it a big role? And again, that can just be cleared up by talking with whoever's presenting your case. Then just a couple of things, ways not to annoy the people who are reviewing your dossier. You don't want somebody going through your dossier and cursing and getting frustrated. That's not a good way to have somebody review your dossier. So just a couple of very basic things, and I bet Julia talks about some of these. Make sure things are very well organized, and don't rely on usually there's an admin assistant in a department who can help with that, but I have found it's really important for the candidate themselves, have everything very clearly organized so people aren't left asking a lot of questions. Make sure the status of your materials are clear. So for example, if you and your department are allowed to include some articles that are simply under review, make sure it's clear if they're under review or they're in press or they're already published. Same thing with grant proposals. A lot of departments give credit if you've submitted a grant proposal, regardless of whether it's been funded, but just make sure that's clear, because it's very clear to you, but not clear to the 20-some people who are reviewing your file. Don't include old unnecessary documents. Sometimes these dossiers are just monstrous and you start looking through them. And I was finding things in them and thinking, why did people include some of this stuff? And a lot of candidates will say, well, I thought I had to include everything I'd ever done in my life, basically. It's like, no, have a good conversation about, which manuscripts to include, which publications. So just keep unnecessary things out of there because they slow the reviewer down. Make sure you don't have things missing. So somebody always has some of their teaching evaluations missing. And it comes down to a frantic race at the end. And I know I and the department chair and the department administrator and the candidate were racing around at the last minute trying to find teachers' ratings or like peer evaluations or student letters. If you include student letters, just start planning ahead of time and make sure that all that material is in there and clearly listed so people don't have to go searching. Because if you have things missing, people get suspicious. Well, why was that particular class rating not included? What there was something bad about that. So I'm going to move on from that part about not annoying your dossier reviewers. And just a couple other things that have come up over time. And the first thing I would say that impresses people who are reading your dossier is to make sure that you address feedback you've gotten from previous years. So no matter where you are in the process, faculty love it when they think you took their feedback seriously, especially if it was helpful. But I think it's really good to acknowledge. So, and I'll just give you a few examples. So if you got some feedback, just like in an annual review, that your teaching could use a little bump, a little help, then you'd want to list things like, did you take on-campus teaching workshops to try to improve your teaching? Did you go and observe other faculty teach? Did you meet with your mentor, like a teaching mentor or somebody to talk about it? Did you talk with the chair about it? They also like to see if there's certain comments that keep coming up, like on your student evaluations, did you try to actually address them? Because faculty who review these files really like a thoughtful approach, not a defensive approach, but they like when candidates are very thoughtful and really try to incorporate. You don't have to do everything that was suggested, but just to demonstrate, yeah, I took your feedback to me seriously, and I'm thinking it helped, but at least I did what I could. And that effort is actually really appreciated. In the research area, for example, common feedback that people get and then you might want to comment on is a lot of times, and I'm talking more assistant professors here probably, make sure you increase your number of first author publications. That's kind of a thing annually said, or make sure, you should be collaborating with a few more people, but not too many people. You got to get that balance. So if you're doing that, make sure you indicate, yeah, look at how many more first author pubs I have this year. If you were encouraged to publish in higher impact journals, don't assume that the reviewers of your file are going to notice that you've done that. You'd want to spell that out. See, I've increased the impact of the journals I'm publishing. If you've gotten your graduate students more involved on your projects and that was a recommendation, make sure it's spelled out. And as I mentioned with grant proposals before, a lot of departments really value just people submitting grant proposals, even if they weren't funded. So make sure you do mention that because that could get missed. In the service area, I noticed this on Julia's thing about service, just don't list out all the committees you're on. Just a little bit more of a thoughtful thing about, like if somebody said, in terms of responding to feedback, maybe they would say something as simple as, well, I can't really tell what this person's doing for service. I'm on one committee with them and they never say anything. So if you're involved in service, make sure you say a few words about what you tried to do on the committee that you were on. It doesn't have to be major, but just especially, again, I guess I'm thinking more people mid-pro or assistant professors, but what was your involvement? What was your contribution? The next thing I want to talk about is the definition of teaching. And maybe you're already doing this, but one thing that I know has come up that I've seen over the years is people have learned that you can define teaching quite broadly. So in other words, teaching doesn't have to just be classroom teaching, but teaching is the mentoring you do. And sometimes people forget that it's not just mentoring graduate students, but if you have a lab that has a lot of undergraduates in it, or if you have honors students, you just make sure it's really clear how involved these students are with you and what your role is, because people appreciate and recognize the time commitment that is to do mentoring. And so I think it's really helpful when you spell out what you're doing. The other thing is also what I would consider under teaching is any kind of informal instruction that you do. And by that, if you're participating on campus and giving talks and participating in things like this where you're instructing. I even think informal instruction is there's some people in our department who speak up a lot at meetings, and it's just beautiful what they contribute to meetings. And to me, they're instructing other faculty by the way they're modeling behavior, whatever the topic is. So there's a lot of different ways you can define teaching. And I think it's helpful, especially if, I know Susan was just saying, you've got to have your excellence, at least one area. If your teaching is close but needs a little boost, make sure people see all the teaching that you really do. I just want to mention, make sure you clarify the attention you've paid to diversity and cultural issues. And that could be, maybe there's a component of that in your research, maybe there's a component of that in your teaching, and maybe there's a component of that in your service. And so you don't want to consider it exclusively service if it really fulfills those other areas too. And a lot of faculty really appreciate whatever the contribution is. And the last thing I want to mention is to outline your progress towards your goals. This is another thing that it's really helpful, I think, for people to see, this is where you started since your last review or since you came to UNM. This is what the plan was. This is the progress you've made towards that plan. And this is where you plan to go yet from there, kind of your future goals. And I think Julia mentions that too. So people will like to see, and I really appreciate it when a faculty member says, well, I meant to get, this many pubs this year, and I really didn't quite make it, but I did get this many done, and I did get more students involved. It's just like an honest, this is what I did, and maybe I didn't quite make it here, but look at these other great things I've done. And people, I think, value that. So just make sure your goals and the progress you've made toward them has been clarified across all areas, research, teaching, and service. All right, that's all I got.
Any questions right now for Jane? I'm about to step you through how you do that in each component of the dossier. Okay, good question. So Tara, about how to strike a balance so that it doesn't look like you're focused too much on service or teaching. And also, I'll stop thinking about sharing my screen for a minute. And also in terms of thinking about external review letters, which I am going to talk about, but yeah, let's see particularly if Jane has thoughts on either of these two questions in the chat.
Let me just talk about the external review letters first. So you have to submit a number of names, and then the department faculty have to submit a number of names. And you know, there's constraints on those, you know, there's rules you have to follow for, and they might vary a little bit by department. So I know like in our department, like if someone's, let's say someone's coming up for tenure, that it has, they mostly want people in psychology, but you can take a few people from outside if the person's more in the neuroscience area. We always like to get full professors to do the reviews, but if it's somebody coming up for tenure, associate professors are okay. So partly it's a matter of, you know, you can talk with other people about it in terms of names maybe that they might suggest. Separate sets of names will be going in. If both you and other people suggest the same person, it kind of gets counted in favor of like the department suggested this. So that's good. Yeah, it's good to, I don't know if I have a certain strategy for the kinds of names you put forward. People usually put forward the names of people that they cite in their work, usually the ones they agree with, the research that agrees with theirs, but it doesn't have to always come down to that.
And I think we're gonna get to the balance piece, I think is part of what I'm about to talk about. So I think I'll postpone that. And we're gonna say a little more about letters, but for those of you who don't know, so mid-probationary evaluations do not go out for external review. Promotion and tenure and promotion to professor do. And half of the external reviewers will come from a list that you will provide. So you will be asked early on to provide a list of between 6 and 12 names, depending on the department, with the goal of ending up with 6 letters. The provost has recently said, hey, it's a pandemic. 6 would be a great number rather than 8 or 10. Everybody's overworked, including the external review writers. Let's acknowledge that. But the idea is to come up with 6 letters, half from your list, half from the department's list. They, in general, cannot be your PhD advisor, postdoc advisor, or close collaborators, i.e. people you have published with or people you are on grant proposals with. But we will talk in a minute about how to incorporate those people into your dossier.
I'm going to scoot on out if that's okay now.
Thank you, Jane.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
All right. So not only talk to, you know, this process works differently in different colleges and schools and different departments. So figure out early on, what are the expectations of your department and college or school? There are general guidelines on the provost website under the Office of Faculty Affairs and Services. The 2021 guidelines are still there. The 21-22 guidelines will go up sometime this summer, but they aren't going to be very different. Arts and Sciences has an extensive website with information for all of the different faculty milestone evaluations and for lecturer evaluations. If you are not in Arts and Sciences, there is so much information here, it might be beneficial for you anyway. Just if you're not in Arts and Sciences, don't click on the, for questions, contact X person within Arts and Sciences, because like the administrator, for example, who helps faculty with RPT software, has her hands full helping the Arts and Sciences faculty. But you can ask me, and you can ask Bill Stanley, the Associate Provost for Faculty Success. We are both outside of the decision process with the exception of our home departments. So we can have confidential meetings with you at any time about any aspect of this. Arts and Sciences and Engineering have things up on their website. I know for the libraries, it's in their intranet. I know with the College of Fine Arts, it's more the department level expectations. So it varies a lot. Figure out what they are early, because the expectations will have something about timing and format. You also want to early on talk to your department chair and make sure you understand the department process and timing. And I'll say more about that shortly. So there are actually 2 aspects of dossier preparation that you have to manage. One is your research, teaching, and service statements and summaries of these statements. These you can work on if you're feeling creative, you're inspired, you're motivated to get them written, you've really got the energy to do something that requires thought. There is a whole separate piece that involves, as Jane was partially just alluding to, gathering, documenting, and organizing things for the retention, promotion, and tenure upload. This is the software system that we use to manage this process, and it has rules. There's stuff, there's file naming conventions you are required to follow. There's numbering things. You will not enjoy it. You will hate yourself and everything around you if you leave this until the last minute. I'm going to say this now. I'm going to say this if you talk to me individually. I'm going to say this in mentoring groups. But towards the end of the summary, I'm still going to be hearing, oh my God, this is so much work. This part's a lot of work. Do not underestimate this part. On the other hand, a lot of it doesn't require thought. So if you want to make progress, but you positively cannot stand to think about writing your statements, start pulling together the other information and figuring out what information you need to pull together. You can't actually upload stuff to RPT till the end of the summer or the start of the fall semester, but the guidelines are on the Provost OFAS site, and on the end, there's a document on the Arts and Sciences site that steps you through the file naming conventions and things. So going ahead and finding the information and getting it in the right format and naming the files correctly is something you can do when you need to feel like you're making progress, but just absolutely are too tired or stressed to think. So you have to iterate between these two, because you can also lose your mind if you spend too much time like on file naming conventions. So just spend some time on both of these this summer, because you're not gonna have more time in the fall semester right before stuff is due. So you're going to need research, teaching, and service statements. And these are the things people tend to spend the most time on and stress on the most. But like I said, don't forget these other pieces that kind of are behind the scenes. Arts and Sciences has a CV format, which is, kind of painful all by itself. And so hopefully if you're an Arts and Sciences faculty member, you've already got your CV in the standard format. But if you don't, boy, don't put that off either. Many other colleges and schools do not have a standard format, but it's worth talking to your chair if there are things faculty prefer to see or not. And this goes back to something Jane was saying. It can really annoy people reviewing your file if they cannot tell the difference between what articles or proposals are published, under review, in press, and in process. And you want to have those clearly delineated. And you also want to separate peer-reviewed articles from maybe pieces you've published that are not peer-reviewed. If you have something invited, but that was peer-reviewed, then that's an important distinction to make. Although in general, people want to say yes. Also, every department's got a couple of curmudgeons that are going to be really, really picky. And you want to make it hard for them to find something to get like temporarily on the ceiling about. At the end of the day, it probably won't impact the vote, but it'll add a little stress for you if people are asking you like really, really picky questions at the last minute. In general, statements of about 3 to 5 pages for research and teaching are expected. Keep in mind, and service statements are frequently less. School of Engineering limits these to 2 pages. Keep in mind, lots of people are going to be reading this who are not in your department. If you go too deep into detail, you are going to lose the audience. And, particularly at the provost level, when you think about how many files people are looking at, expecting people to read more than sort of 12 to 15 pages about your work when they may have 30 other files to look at is asking for a lot of attention. So you want to take the time to write the concise statements. The other thing about taking the time and writing the concise statement, it makes it really easy for people to tell what you've done. You know, you don't want people to have to hunt for what you've actually done. Now, where this becomes different is on the research statement, and this is about departmental culture too. If you're going up for promotion and tenure, promotion to professor, things will go out to external reviewers. That part will have to happen before your dossier has to be finished for the department to look at it, because the external review letters will be part of that. So you're going to want to work on your research statement first. So it's important to talk to your chair about when that's going to go out. We're going to talk more about each of the statements, but in particular, some departments send out more extensive research statements or more technical research statements than you might include in your dossier because they're going to a different audience. So you want to figure out this early on, what's the departmental culture? You know, I've seen people submit 20-page research statements, and even in my own field, I have trouble. You know, if they're getting that deep into the technical details, then it's really hard for the on-campus reviewers. But you may want something written at a different technical level, or that's a little longer for the external reviewers. Talk to your department chair about what's the culture. Also talk to them about what gets sent out. At a minimum, it should be your research statement and your CV, and examples of publications or book chapters, whatever the appropriate products are, but figure that out early. Arts and Sciences requires a teaching portfolio. So every college has a few different things. Figure out what that is. So you're incorporating that into your plan for developing the dossier. Just as one more example of other expectations, School of Engineering faculty are frequently stunned to discover that the School of Engineering requires a statement of professional aspirations for the next 10 years. Honestly, some people have trouble caring by the time they finish their dossier, but so it's good to know, going in, what's required. School of Engineering has very specific things about citations. Most other schools and colleges don't, but find out early. And so the big overarching questions: what are your most significant accomplishments? What are you most proud of? Think about things. What are you excited that you've accomplished? Depending on what level of review, how have you had an impact on the department, the program, the college or school, the university, your professional communities, your outreach communities? And if you're applying for mid-pro, this isn't a question you're perhaps ready to think about yet in terms of, because you haven't been here long enough, but you're on departmental committees. But for everyone else, these are things to be thinking about. Why is your work important? And you can think about this a bunch of different ways. What questions are you answering? Or what problems are you trying to solve? Where are you trying to go with your work? How are you helping students be successful? These are all kind of big questions to be thinking about that all enter into kind of all of your statements. Okay, you're going to say, okay, I'm going to start. And you sit down and you have this blank Word document in front of you. And you're thinking, okay, 3 pages, summarize my entire research career, 3 pages, ready, set, go, what the hell have I done? And you start to think, I don't know. What if I do it wrong? Have I done anything? Everyone goes through this regardless of how long the accomplishment list is. Everyone, because it's painful to kind of be forced to do this level of evaluation on your accomplishments, because most of us are at least as aware of the things we meant to do and didn't as the things we did. And a lot of the things you meant to do and didn't are irrelevant, because you want to talk about the things you've done and are planning to do. So if you have this response, I want you to take a deep breath. You are good at stuff and things. That's why you're here. We know you were good at both stuff and things. You have stuff and things that you can include. If you have been documenting your accomplishments all along in a spreadsheet, a Word doc, a list, however you've been doing it, then start reviewing them and think about what's the most significant. If you haven't been, just do a brain dump of a list. Okay, what have I done since I got here at any level in terms of committee service, professional work, research, publications, submitting grants, training students, anything. Just start a list. You can always organize it later. Sit with a friend, do the same thing. Advance runs dossier preparation groups during the summer. Figure out something that'll work to you to get you to the point where you can start making progress. But just know everyone at some point in this process has hit some sort of wall, and there's a bunch of ways to get through it. The goal is to have a list of 3 to 5 things that are important to you to emphasize in each of your statements. There's stuff you're expected to include, and we're definitely going to help you figure out how to do that. But for the first time thinking through it, you want to think about what's important to you. What are you proudest of about your research and scholarship? What do you think is most significant? What's the coolest thing you've done working with students? And start from there, and then figure out how to work in whatever other metrics or expectations are expected for your discipline, your department, your program. This really, really is your narrative, and take control of it from the beginning. Don't get hung up on, well, the department wants X and Y, and I've got a lot of X and not so much Y. You can tell your story. And before we get into more about telling your story, I want to address the pandemic in the room. There has been one. Some of you have colleagues who are acknowledging it. Some of you have colleagues who are going, what's your problem? The leadership knows we are still in the midst of a pandemic. From the study Advance did, we know faculty spent more time learning how to teach online, more time teaching, mentoring students, in meetings, doing service, and less time on research and professional development. We know lots of faculty spent more time on childcare and caring for adults. Most faculty report higher stress, less psychological well-being, and less emotional well-being. Among the many paradoxes of the pandemic is that it's impacted everyone, but in highly individual ways. And Advance is pushing that with the upper level leadership and deans and chairs, and trying to let faculty know that, yeah, this is the way it is. We know this. People have had various levels of impacts, and their work has been impacted in very different ways. So this is a given. And there's a link to our impact report, which has other information. But so no, you're not the only one that was impacted. And if you feel like you were profoundly impacted, you're surrounded by a lot of other people who were. So then the question becomes, do I address this? How do I address this? And the provost has said that faculty have agency in this. You can choose not to address it. You can choose to address it. There are a variety of ways you can choose to address it. The Senior Vice Provost, Barbara Rodriguez, put out guidelines for addressing COVID impact in annual reviews. These are available on the OFAS website and from the Advanced COVID resources. Like I said, these are live links, and I'll send this out after this. You can sort of use those guidelines to think through how you want to do it. History decided that was too much work and made a checklist. You can modify the checklist. the BIPOC Faculty Caucus for UA-UNM created an impact memo. So these are options. You could reference the advance report. And then, so how are you going to do that? You can discuss the impact of COVID in one or more of your research, teaching, and service statements. One of the reasons I think this is important is I know a lot of you did absolutely heroic work in helping students. And as Jane was saying, and I've heard the provost say, everything you do for students counts as teaching. You are advancing the educational mission of this institution. You are helping students be successful. Everything you did to help students during this awful time that you want to summarize in your teaching statement can go in there. There was heroic work done. It counts, and it is teaching. It is not service. You helped students. Some people may want to write about that because you can write about it positively, but may not want to write about it in research, or may not be sure, this is up to you. Talk to friends, talk to your department chair, talk to us, talk to me, talk to Bill, if you want help navigating this. You could include the checklist with different things checked in your supplemental documents and refer to it from your statements. You could put the impact memo from the UA-UNM BIPOC caucus in the supplemental documents and refer to it with, the pandemic generally affected faculty's ability to see this. One thing we do not want is for anyone to feel like you are being asked to relive the emotional and psychological stresses and traumas of this. You owe no one a look into your internal lives. So on the other hand, we are discussing with chairs and deans, et cetera. You can use simple declarative statements with no personal details, and you will not be asked to prove it. So you could say, I was unable to work for X weeks or months during the semester or the pandemic. You don't have to say why. It could be you were sick. It could be a loved one was sick. It could be really intensive childcare. There's all kinds of reasons. You could just write, I was unable to work. My lab was shut down for X weeks, months. I lost samples, specimens, materials, which will take X time to recover. My work was brought to a halt by. I have normally been in conversations with people worrying about how to address the negative components rather than the I did heroic work for students components. But so this is why I'm focusing on this piece here, but simple declarative sentences. Yeah, this has been really hard. If you want to include it in your research statement or scholarship statement, some simple, hey, folks, there was a pandemic, by just writing these things, helps people keep that in mind. But you don't have to. If you are comfortable, you're coming, many of you had a lot in the pipeline when we went into the pandemic, and you may feel like your record's in good shape and you don't want to dwell on it. That's fine. This is up to you. Think about what do people need to know about where you are in your research and teaching. If you think the pandemic impacted it in ways that are important for people to understand, there's a bunch of different ways you can reference it. And if you need help, feel free to ask. So if we think briefly about the different types of statements, one of the things that's, keep in mind for all of them, the first paragraph of the statement should be something that can be understood by someone from outside of your department for all of them. Big, broad umbrella statement about what your work is, or why you do it, or what problem you're trying to solve. Something that someone from a completely different department can appreciate and go, hey, I don't know anything about that, but that's interesting. and we'll encourage them to read a little more. So you don't have to include all of this, but think about it. The key is, why are you studying whatever it is you study? You can talk about it from why it fascinates you, why it's societally important, or what questions you're trying to answer. All different kinds of approaches can work. There is no one right way to do this. The key thing is that it be something that other people can kind of go, oh, okay, I see that. And that can be something you really have to work at. And that's one of the things we do in the mentoring groups. You always want to have a little bit about what you're planning to do. Whether it's for mid-pro, tenure, or promotion to professor, we want to know you're still thinking ahead. You're not planning to just go, okay, I'm done. So it's a lot about what you've done, but then some about what you're planning to do. Remember, if you're in a STEM field that expects a research group, as part of mid-pro and tenure, establishing a functioning research group is a legitimate accomplishment. This is not something to neglect and throw into the background. This is important. So this next bullet about if you had a delay or setback, this was here pre-pandemic, because people have delays and setbacks for all kinds of reasons. So this isn't just about the pandemic, but if you're setting up a lab and your equipment was delayed, or your lab was flooded, or you've haven't been able to recruit grad students. Once again, this is just time to sort of explain how your research and scholarship has developed. You can certainly mention anything you've got in progress, but really, if you mention something in progress, it should be in progress on paper, or well, in your computer, not just in your head. Stuff that's only in your head does not count as in progress for this purpose, because someone might say, oh, hey, can you show me what state it's in? And let me tell you what's in my head isn't a great answer. Graduate student, undergraduate students in labs, mentoring, your students getting award, your students getting NSF GRFPs, your students presenting at conferences. You can talk about students who are engaged in your research and scholarship, both in the research statement and the teaching statement. For the teaching statement, keep in mind your course numbers don't mean anything outside of your department, and they may not mean anything to some of your colleagues in your department. So who are you teaching to? Who's the audience for your classes? Once again, paragraph, overarching about how you approach teaching, how you think about working with the students. If you're doing a teaching portfolio for arts and sciences, you're expected to be reflective throughout, but for everyone, why do you teach the courses you teach? Who's the audience? Are you teaching majors? Are you teaching non-majors? Are you teaching, a gen ed course? How many students are in it? Is it a required class? This is all really important because people appreciate the different attitudes students bring to different levels of courses. And this can help people better understand sort of your teaching load and decisions you've made. Think about, how do you engage students? What's worked best? What are you trying to improve? Has anything surprised you, positively or negatively? To go back to what Jane was saying, if you've had issues or problems, just address it. I tried this in this class and it turned out the students really hated it, or it didn't work well, or it caused this sort of issue. So now I've modified it and we're doing this. Or if you haven't had time to modify it yet, or next time I teach the course, I will do this. You definitely don't have to be perfect at any of this. The idea is, are you thinking about what you're doing and how you're engaging the students, and how are you thinking about it? Once again, so many different ways you can be doing this. Don't get stuck on there's only one right answer. What are you doing? What do you enjoy about working with our students? What seems to work best for you? Everybody's got very different teaching styles. If you have some peer evaluations that suggest things that just don't fit, that's okay. You can say, I thought about this advice and am trying to get to, the same result by doing this different thing. Or this advice made a lot of sense, and next time I teach, I'm going to do X. Just show you're thinking about it. We've all had classes where parts of the class didn't go well, or we somehow didn't jive with that particular class. So just sort of address it rather than ignore it. You don't have to have all the solutions, because certainly none of us do. Don't neglect any student mentoring your work you're doing, including if you're helping students from other departments or just other classes. All of that is helping our students be more successful. And once again, particularly during the pandemic, you've all done a lot of work to help students. Let people know what you've done. If you publish any, if you're doing educational research and you're trying to publish it or writing it, you can talk about that. If you're, like I said, work in progress, changes you're planning to make, classes you'd like to teach in the future. You've got a lot of flexibility here. Once again, what's your story about how you're educating our students, broadly defined. The service statement's generally shorter. If you're going up for mid-pro, it's going to be real short, but you should be on some department committees. It's really boring to read list of committees. So what are you doing? What's important to you? And consider all the levels that you are currently involved in. What are you doing in the department? If you're an assistant professor, you're probably not doing anything at the college, school, or university level. If you're an associate professor, you probably are. Write about that. And then don't neglect things you're doing in however you define your community, if you're doing things, and things you're doing professionally. Those are all important. Once again, and if you have goals for some of these, please include them. Your CV's got the list. Write about a few things you've done. You don't have to, particularly if you're applying for promotion to professor and you've done a lot of committee work, you don't have to write about all of it. You can pick a few of the more interesting or important things you've done at a couple of levels and write about them, and then include the rest. But you can pick a few things. You don't have to describe every committee. When you absolutely can't stand to think about it anymore, talk to your department chair. Make sure you do this early. Make sure you know the timeline. Organize your accomplishments, committees, student committees you've been on, anything like that. Like I said, RPT's got a format, start to cope with that. Make sure your CV's updated. You can update your CV until the very last minute. If you do get accomplishments after your dossier has been evaluated, say by the department, you can update things. There is an option to do that. Do you want to download the student evaluations that you're going to need? If you haven't had 3 peer evaluations, then go ahead and talk to your department chair about making sure some happen early in the fall. The supplementary documents section of your dossier can include things like letters of support. If you're involved in a collaboration where you've got proposals or articles or book chapters with people from off campus or more senior people, they can write a letter saying, this is what this person's contributions were. They're really critical to this article, this collaboration, this grant proposal, because they are bringing these skills no one else has. Then if you do that, you point to that letter from your research statement or your teaching statement, whatever it's supporting. Don't assume people are going to find it. Make it easy for them to connect the dots. If you have unsolicited letters of gratitude from students or from other partners, you can include those here. Do not ask your current students or past students to write letters about how wonderful you are. And like we mentioned earlier, you're going to need a list of 6 to 10 potential external referees that the department will then ask some of. And I know there's been a bunch of comments in chat coming in, and I will look at those while we ask Jess to talk about how she approached writing her dossier, and then we will deal with as many of the chat questions and comments as we can.
Hi. Thanks, Julia. I don't know that I have a whole lot to add. I wrote up a bunch of notes, but Julia's kind of hit them all. So I'm gonna just offer a few things that I don't think were highlighted or sort of coping strategies that got me through. And just for context, I'm going to be talking about the process of pulling together your tenure portfolio going up for associate. Although I know that there's other people at different stages. This is sort of my most recent experience. So I hope my tips and suggestions can be a little helpful. So the first thing that I want to say is that it feels like a beast. It feels daunting. I think that's totally normal. And it's important, I think, to try to reconceptualize it in your head as like a bunch of little things that when assembled are a beast, but in fact, they're just little things and you can tackle little things one by one. So the lists that are provided for the components that you need to include are sort of a good way to sort of deconstruct this process and think of it as just accomplishing little tasks building towards this goal. So unpack it, make a list, set some deadlines for yourself. I like to build in rewards. I think it makes all of this much more fun. And form a support group. I think that whether you do that through Advance or if you do it through your own sort of subfield network across universities, other people who are peers that are going up at the same time as you, whatever it is, I think it's really helpful to have some sort of accountability group and then just start sort of chipping away. So the first thing I thought was helpful was really sort of setting it up. And in the setup, I think it's helpful to identify the date at which you have to have everything submitted and then backwards plan from there. And once you have that calendar established, you need to sit down with your chair and go step by step saying, is this right? Is this the right date for this to be submitted? Yes or no? And make sure that you guys are on the same page, because you may have heard one thing from somebody who went up right before you, or another university might be already asking for external letters and you haven't even heard a breath of this yet, and it can cause panic. So have an early conversation with your chair about what your deadline expectations are and make sure it lines up with theirs. I think it's helpful to obtain some examples of successful or unsuccessful maybe statements in your department if possible, and externally if possible. I think seeing what somebody else wrote really takes a lot of the scariness out of it. It's not that long, it's not that complex, it's pretty straightforward. And if you really kind of look at that, I think will feel this is doable. I have done much harder things for sure. So try to find some examples from friends if you can. And then the plan of action is to really sort of, once you've got your setup and you've got your deadlines and you've got clarity from your chair that that's actually correct, then you actually have to start doing stuff. And it was helpful, Julia sort of alluded to this, but it was helpful for me to sort of make a list of things that are like what I call brain tasks and procrastination tasks. Because inevitably I sit down at my desk and I'm like, I am feeling it, I am properly caffeinated, I am going to work on a brain task today. I have no distractions. And that's when you need to focus on the heavy things like the research statement, the service statement, and your teaching statement, because those things really take some narrative, some composition, some thought about what it is that you're even doing here. So those things are great to tackle when you can, but sometimes you just are sputtering. And there are fortunately lots of great ways to procrastinate with this tenure dossier process. So I love procrastinating by updating my CV. And that's something that is really important to do. And so you can do that. You can also engage in the crazy numbering process that is going to be something you memorize. So numbering your stuff, updating your CV, assembling things into files, collecting your papers, right? Pulling them off the internet if you don't have them already. There's a whole bunch of stuff that you'll have at your disposal for those good procrastination tasks when you're just not feeling it. So a few more sort of specific tips that I thought were helpful. Bill Stanley came to me early in my tenure here and said, let me give you a tip. Find the university format for your CV and use it starting today. And then I did, and I didn't have to face that bear at the end. So start that early because the format's a little unique. And then also download and save all of your teaching evaluations. Starting today, stick them in a file, because inevitably you'll have to report how many students were in your class, and you're going to forget that stuff unless you do it today. So it's part of my normal practice then, every time I go up for an annual review, that I pull all that stuff down and I stick it in a file. And then when it came time for the tenure dossier process, it was pretty much all there. I just had to find a few things. So start that process early, and the front loading of it will make your life easier at the end. In your service statement, I think one page, my service statement was one page, and I talked about what I did for the department briefly, the university briefly, and then the discipline briefly. And as an example, this is really where it's helpful to have an accountability group of people that you're working with, because for example, I forgot about like reviews. I do a ton of reviews, and it was not anywhere in my tenure dossier, but it's a huge time sink. And someone's like, oh yeah, I listed how many reviews I did. I'm like, that's a great idea. So that I threw that in there. And so when you work with other people, you remember or are refreshed about the things that you do because they mention it, and then you can sort of start to build off of each other by remembering what it is that you spend all your time doing. With the research statement, which I think was, one of the biggest brain tasks of this process, I think it's really helpful to keep two things in mind. One is that you want to write for an audience, I think, that is in your subject area, but not in your subfield. Remembering that all of this has to go up the university, but also has to make it through your faculty. So you want somebody who's in, for example, political science, who doesn't do political communication, but who does international relations, to be able to understand the terminology and the significance of my work. So think of like that person in your department that's not in your field as sort of your target audience. I found that to be helpful. And then the other thing I think is helpful is to channel your mom or whoever your biggest fan is in your brain as you write your research statement and your service statement and your teaching statement, because they're going to look at what you do and think it's all amazing. And you're going to look at what you do and think it's not even enough. And so you need to put that voice to bed and think about this as somebody who's in your corner who can brag about you. So we're socialized to be humble, and we're socialized to sort of downplay our achievements, but this is a time to not be obnoxious and braggy, but to really highlight the things that you've done, because you've done incredible things. And if you can't channel your mom or somebody that you love, just talk to Julia. She's really good at finding those things that you can brag about and bringing them to the top of your statement. And another reason why the accountability group is really important, because they'll be like, oh, well, look at this won an award. You should probably mention that. And then I think it's really important at the top of the research statement to sort of come out hitting with the big things that you've done. Julia said, the big 4 things. I found it helpful to say, this is how many articles I wrote. This is how many were solo authored. These are the awards that I've won. These are the ones I'm nominated for, but the teaching awards are really a lot of work. So I was just nominated for them, and I didn't go ahead and follow through, but I was nominated. And highlight your H-index if it's good, or how many citations you have if it's good, or the book you wrote if you have. Looking back at all my annual reviews was really helpful to sort of pull all that information together and get it up at the top so that people have a reason to just cheer for you for the rest of your statement. And then if you panicked or broke into hives when I said H-index or the number of citations, that's the point at which you turn and you channel your inner mom. And you say, no, maybe this doesn't have a lot of citations, but this was a really significant article because it made this pivot in the research, or it opened up this entire line of inquiry that was not, there before. And so it has some value, and it might not be in the metrics that people love to cite. So try to be your best cheerleader. The last thing I want to say is that once you've done this, right, you've pulled together your opus and you've submitted it, right, like Simba in The Lion King, and you turn it in, nothing will happen. There is no noise, there is no celebration, there is nothing will happen. So this is the point at which you need to plan your own parade. I think you need to plan something for yourself that once you click send and submit and close that door, you can go take yourself out to dinner or to a yoga class or out dancing or wherever it is that you feel good. You need to go do that for yourself. And then nothing will happen for a very long time. And there might be some some things happening around you and about you and meetings about you, and you won't know about them. But then one day your faculty will convene and they'll review your documents and they'll vote on you. And in that hour, I suggest you do something really special for yourself. I booked a massage during the 1 hour that my faculty was reviewing my tenure case. And so I went there and I went to Betty's and I got my massage. Find something that is good for you to go do that will make you sort of forget, at least for an hour, that your entire department is talking about you. So those are my tips. I hope that that was a little bit helpful. Break it down, treat yourself, plan, start early, and book a massage or something. So I'm here if you guys have any questions. Good luck.
Thanks, Jess. I think that was a great summary of the process. I want to address something someone's asking about. Where was it? I saw it anyway. There's something about, are you required to upload a draft of all works in progress? No, you can. You don't have to upload all of them. This comes back to, we do not want 500-page dossiers. You can upload the ones you think are important for people to see, but you definitely don't have to upload all of your in-progress work. And there've been a lot of links to arts and sciences stuff. Sharon,
Julia, can I just chime in?
Please.
So Jessica said one thing. She referred to a university CV format,
Yeah.
and actually there's an ANS format, which is a slightly cumbersome but good format because it's very standardized. And so there's nothing wrong with any of you who are not in ANS. There's nothing wrong with you using the ANS format. It's slightly more subdivided into different categories than a kind of standard CV would be, but that sort of generates a certain amount of transparency. So I don't see any problem with using that. And all of those things, if you just go to the College of Arts and Sciences website, you click on the faculty tab and you draw down, and there's a basically promotion and tenure information for faculty. And that's where there's that whole page that has resources, guidelines, forms, model formats, etc.
Bill, do you have thoughts on Debbie Sue's question on, there's the number of students enrolled in a course, but then students withdraw, convert to audit. What do you do with that in terms of reporting number of students?
I use the denominator on the evaluations.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. You would use what the number on the student evaluations.
Yeah, so this is specifically in reporting evaluations. Yeah, I would just use whatever is reported by the system. I mean, the other standard number for evaluation is the 21-day census, which you can find on the registrar's site, and that goes back a number of semesters. It doesn't go back forever, but you can go back 4 years or more, and just pull up the enrollments for your class. And that's sort of what your enrollment was on day 21, which is what we report to the state. So that's also a very, solid number where if there's ever any questions, you can refer to the website.
Great, thank you. I originally have the question because I figured out that the number of grades I give out is not equal to that number. So I was wondering whether that would be an issue. Thank you.
Not at all.
No.
That's not a concern.
Okay, good question. How much of your mid-pro materials can you use for promotion and tenure? You can start out assuming you're going to do a lot. People frequently end up deciding they need to totally rewrite their research statements because their thinking has evolved, but it's a great starting point. But don't force yourself to stick with it if you've sort of changed your perspective on how you want to talk about your research. But yeah, certainly, definitely pull out all your mid-pro materials if you're applying for promotion and tenure, and think about how much of that can you use. And yeah, and there are the School of Engineering has some CV things they want to see in the CV. So see if your school or college has has requirements, not all of them do. And if you feel like you need some structure, the A&S one will give you plenty of structure.
I think the one thing I would add, Julia, is having sat on the provost TNP committee a few times. I mean, I have seen some non-ANS CVs presented for promotion review where it really isn't clear whether a given article was in a peer-reviewed venue or not, and there's some sort of merging of book chapters and journal articles, and that I would not do that. I mean, I would you might not want to. If you're not an ANS, you might not need to follow the ANS format specific, but you definitely want to segregate peer-reviewed articles versus book chapters versus other types of publications, and not combine those, because that's not well received generally.
I'll just comment or tag on to that. You are absolutely right. I mean, whatever format you choose for your CV or list your accomplishments, clearly identifying these different categories of things that in academia we tend to care about or categorize. Another one is students. A lot of it's sometimes not always clear. Were you the committee chair for this student? Or did you just sit on the committee? What level of mentoring did you do? Just being as clear as possible is really important.
And definitely public scholarship, communication, engagement counts, but it needs to be labeled that way. So if you write opinion pieces for a professional organization or for your community, or doing things that are more public facing, absolutely include them, but distinguish between them in your CV, and how you, and yeah, absolutely you can incorporate them in your statements, but just make sure you're clear about the audience and the intent. But you can definitely include things. The key is just to make sure things are correctly identified in your CV so people know how to interpret them. It isn't that they want to diminish some of these things, they want to know how to interpret them. And it goes back to what Jane was saying, was don't piss off the people reading your dossier. And so but also make it easy for them to see what you've done. People generally absolutely want to say yes, but don't frustrate them in trying to figure out how to say yes. Any other questions right now? Can't see everyone. Okay. So if not, Sandy will send you a PDF of the slides. This webinar will be posted on the Advanced Milestone Evaluation webpage. You know, feel free to ask any of us questions anytime along the way. And it is absolutely standard practice for you to feel the need to ask the same questions throughout the process, because you're going to hear the answers differently depending on what stage of the process you're in. So don't worry if you need to come back and ask about the things we've just covered, because it's going to feel different at different points. So get as much help as you need while you're preparing the dossier. You absolutely don't have to lock yourself away and do this by yourself. There's lots of different ways you can get help throughout this process, and please do. And I cannot say enough how important it is to talk to your department chair early and often. Sometimes they lose track of time. It's still blurs day for all of us, particularly right now. So really sitting and saying, okay, when are you going to contact external referees? When is this going out? When is the department going to do it? And the thing we haven't mentioned is some departments, not all, but some departments have you give a seminar on your work. If you don't know what your department culture is, find out. You know, you may be giving a seminar in the fall or early in the spring semester. So go ahead and ask your department chair all these questions. And I'll just end with one other note. Colleagues are going to offer contradictory advice. I'm sorry. That's just the way it's going to be. Excuse me. Incorporate the things in your statement that make sense to you. Advice that really feels wrong to you is advice, not an order. And if you have questions, and you need advice from outside the department, talk to me, talk to Bill, talk to colleagues, other excuse me, who've been through this, who are in other departments, and we will help you figure it out. And I think at that, I will say thank you, Susan and Jess and Bill for manning the chat there and providing lots of links. You can do this. Reach out for help when you need it, and best of luck in preparing the dossiers and remaining patient throughout the next year, but definitely let us know when we can help. And take care and have a good weekend.